Scotland depth chart for 2022, folks. We are going to have a look at Gregor Townsend's squad as I sit here in early 2023, but back to 2022 to see what was he doing with the squad, which positions was he rotating players, which players did he rely on, and basically how did things go. We've already had a look at the Irish and the French, the All Blacks and Springboks and Wallabies and English to kind of compare which coaches are doing things which way. So some coaches genuinely have used a lot of players. Some keep things remarkably consistent. And where do the Scots fit into all this? Weirdly, kind of consistent, but also I think the most players of any team thus far. So we'll get into that in a second. But you guys can let us know your thoughts on how you reckon the Scots went in 2022 as to whether it was a disappointing or successful season. I mean, 5 wins, if we get to the win-loss record, 7 losses, it's not that flash, to be honest. I mean, you look at the Six Nations campaign, win over England, which they seem to be able to do recently. They always had the pretty good numbers against Eddie Jones's England. And then a disappointing loss to Wales, especially given the year Wales had. Lose to France pretty heavily, beat Italy, and then lose to Ireland again pretty heavily. So yeah, not that great a Six Nations if you want to be brutally honest. Especially, I think the Wales game is the one they'll really look back as the one that kind of let the whole campaign down. They lose the series away to Argentina 2-1. The middle game is the one that they win 29-6. It's a good win, but then they blow a lead to lose the final one when it looked like they might be going to win the series. And then they split the final games in autumn, lose to Australia, win against Fiji, lose against New Zealand, and then win against Argentina. Again, talking about disappointments, like the lead they had against the All Blacks, which couldn't result in a win, is ultimately pretty disappointing, even if there were positives to be taken from the performance. By position, like I said, Gregor Townsend's used a lot of players. But he's got this thing where some of the players literally only appear for one game and maybe for like 10 minutes. So they're almost inconsequential in what they've added to the side. I mean, you can argue that having a test cap, even if it's for a few minutes, is going to be some kind of valuable experience in the bank going forward if called upon, because you've played test rugby as of 2022. But it's not doing much for cohesion or anything. I mean, if they're in the squad, I guess sure enough they're training and whatnot. But there's a lot of guys who get kind of really token performances. For the front row, there's 2 props who are largely very relied upon in 2022. But we'll start with loosehead number 1. Pierre Schoeman gets over 70% of the game time this year. He has been absolute stalwart, and the crowd seem to love him. They chant whenever he gets the ball, which is fantastic. And Sutherland there in blue, his injuries have not helped. I mean, he's played less than 20% of the game time just because he's been injured. And there's still room for 3 other guys. Batty, Dell, and Kebble all get really kind of token game time there. But not a heck of a lot. It's pretty much Pierre Schoeman with Rory Sutherland and other. I mean, Alan Dell is literally one of the guys who pops up for one game and then is never really seen again. Hooker is certainly more of a mixed bag. I do think you're pretty blessed for choice in the number 2 jersey in Scotland. Turner's there in green, McAnally blue, Fraser Brown yellow, Dave Cherry purple, and then Ewan Ashman red. Clearly Turner gets the majority of the game time with just under half. And then the remaining 4 guys get pretty much an even split of the minutes. It's good to see Fraser Brown back, because I don't think we saw him play in 2021. And then McAnally, Cherry, and Ashman all get some kind of game time. I think whichever one of these guys gets put into the squad is certainly going to do a job. I think that's one area you guys don't have any problems. I think each of them's gotten enough game time either this year or even, well, not this year because we're in 2023, 2022 or 2021 or even prior, that they're going to slot into a test side pretty comfortably. They've all had a run at some point, and none of them are being just thrown kind of token game time here. And then tighthead, it's all Xander Fagerson, even more so than Pierre Schoeman on the loosehead side. So 3/4 of the game time for Xander Fagerson. Still, I mean, I've been a big supporter of that guy. I am following his penalty count, which is creeping up pretty high, isn't it? But I still think he's a classy player. And then Nell in blue, Javin Sebastian in yellow, and then Murphy Walker came onto the scene with a little bit of game time there in purple, but we're not talking a heck of a lot of minutes. So he's not like he's had a start and played, 40, 60 minutes of game time. It's been, I think, a couple of 10, 15-minute shifts at the end of games. Still better than nothing, but you would hate to see the likes of a Ferguson or a Schoeman go down prior to a World Cup based on how much game time these guys have been getting, at least in 2022. Looking at the locks, I think it's another area where Scotland does pretty well. If we're looking at your loose head lock, which is your number 4, Grant Gilchrist gets around about half the game time, and then Sam Skinner is there in blue with around a third of the game time. So those are your 2 kind of main guys, which I think you're doing pretty well. And then Gilchrist also appears on the tighthead side as well. But Gilchrist and Skinner there, green and blue. Cummings, Glenn Young, Richie Gray, Jamie Hodge, all those guys have kind of filled in a wee bit, but all those guys' time combined is not going to be as much as what we've seen from the likes of Sam Skinner in that jersey this year. So I do think that's pretty solid. And then you got Johnny Gray with about half the game time in the number 5 jersey. Absolute tackling machine. You guys know I love that player. And then Gilchrist appears there in blue. So if you add Gilchrist numbers together, he's been a real stalwart for Gregor Townsend this year. Richie Gray there in yellow in the number 5, and then Sam Skinner appears again in purple. So between the Gray brothers, Gilchrist and Skinner, I think you guys are pretty well covered. And then you've got other guys who have been kind of there or thereabouts as well. So yeah, man, looking at this, I don't think you're too short for depth. Scotland's, I think, line-out numbers, haven't looked them up prior to this video, but I seem to remember they were pretty good. It was the Southern Hemisphere teams that all struggled at line-out time this year. I think it was France and Ireland that were the best, but still, yeah, I should go back and check that. But anyway, I do think your locking stocks, they look pretty good. Maybe it'd be nice to see one of the other guys. I mean, Richie Gray's getting a little decent bit of game time, and he's got enough experience that if he's called upon in a World Cup, he's going to be able to step up. Let's look at the back row. The back row does kind of paint an interesting picture because, like many countries, the number 6 jersey is a bit of a revolving door. That seems to be the one position that nobody is especially secured in. It doesn't help that that's a jersey whenever there's cards involved. Often that player gets substituted. I mean, that's probably not going to affect the numbers a heck of a lot, but yeah, there's been a lot of guys who've packed down on the blind side for Scotland this year. Interestingly, it's Rory Darge who's there in green. You might have thought Jamie Ritchie, he's Scotland captain. No, he's had less game time. He missed a lot of the Scotland season earlier in the year. He's obviously finished the year in autumn, but he missed so much of the year at the start, didn't he? So Rory Darge, who missed the end, appears at the start with about a third of the game time. Jamie Ritchie's there with about a quarter. You've had Matt Ferguson. I think he's only started one game at 6, but sometimes to accommodate Dempsey when Dempsey's come on, he's been shifting to 6. Bradbury, Christie, Skinner, and Haining are there as well. So a whole bunch of names. Bradbury, I don't think we've seen him play since he moved to Bristol. It's been a while since we've seen Bradbury in Scottish colours anyway, but he's another one who's been kind of there or thereabouts for some time. But yeah, certainly Jamie Ritchie's had less game time than he did last year, but we can count injury for that. And Rory Darge has, up until his injury, I think kind of looked the business. He's not necessarily an out-and-out blindside flanker, is he? But he's definitely a turnover merchant and certainly a tackling machine. So he's going to put Hamish Watson under pressure. And Hamish Watson, if speaking of him, he's that guy there, green at number 7. That's pretty much the same as it was last year. That jersey's his to lose at the moment. And then Jamie Ritchie's also had a bit of time at 7. So Jamie Ritchie, if you're counting his time there in blue at 6 and blue at 7, he's at least had almost 40% of the game time, maybe just a bit under. So he's still been, for the guy who's the captain, usually the captain is here with like 80% of the game time or whatever, but not to be with Jamie Ritchie. But anyway, there he is at 7. Darge is also there at 7 in yellow, and then Luke Crosby's there as well with a little bit of kind of token game time. But essentially, Hamish Watson's your main guy, with a couple of other guys who've filled in, a couple of jack-of-all-trades guys, and the likes of Ritchie and Darge. Number 8, Matt Ferguson. It's kind of to be expected. That guy's been a regular fixture for Scotland at number 8 for a number of years now. Bradbury's there as well. And Jack Dempsey is the closest thing I think we've got at the moment to a threat to his position. So Dempsey and Bradbury have had very similar game time, but Dempsey is there in yellow. He's actually had a little bit more game time than Brad Briggett. Those colours run the wrong way, but it's much of a muchness. But Dempsey, since he switched over from Wallaby Gold, has found a little bit of favour with Gregor Townsend. So we will see how things kind of pan out. I still think it's going to be Richie, Watson, and Ferguson, barring injury, because that seems to be the combination that Gregor likes. But with some guys like Dempsey and Daj challenging for position, you never quite can be guaranteed. There's been a few forwards who've dropped off, like Dylan Richardson was one of the guys who they were talking about maybe being a regular fixture. He got a bit of token game time in 2021 and then didn't play at all in 2022. Gary Graham didn't get any game time. Simon Bergen. There's been a few guys who've kind of dropped off, but it's largely familiar faces with the return of guys like Alan Dell got a little bit of game time. Fraser Brown. Murphy Walker came in. So there's been a little bit of an introduction of some new blood and some returning guys who missed the previous year for whatever reason. Into the backs, number 9 is Ali Price. It kind of makes sense. I don't think you'd get any prizes for guessing that he's had like 3/4 of the game time this year. He's clearly the favourite. But Ben White, there in blue, is the second guy. He seems to have taken that spot. I mean, George Horn and Ben Vallicott have also had really token minutes, but their stocks are well behind Ben White at this point. Scott Steele, I think we saw in 2021, hasn't appeared for Scotland in the last 12 months. So, it's Price and White. Pretty much simple as that. There's that many minutes invested in Price that you'd hate to see him go down. There's other guys who've had more minutes, like Horn certainly had more minutes in previous years than he has in 2022 anyway. And then number 10 still remains a vexing issue for Scotland, isn't it? I mean, Finn Russell was just edging Kinghorn for minutes there. It's almost an even split between the two of them in green and blue. I feel like most people would pick Finn Russell. Kinghorn, with his ability to cover so many positions, I think going into a World Cup as a perfect squad guy, perfect bench guy, because he can cover fullback, he can cover the wings, he can cover 10. But would you want him as your leading 10 going into a World Cup, quarterfinal? Essentially knockout pool game? I don't know. Yeah, it's a tough question, isn't it? Hastings is there as well with Ross Thompson. Ross Thompson must be the number one guy for being like an unused substitute this year. I think he's had like 2 or 3 games where he's just rode the pine and not managed to get off. Kinghorn and Russell. The relationship between Russell and Gregor Townsend always remains an interesting one. But Russell edges it just in terms of the minutes last year. Midfield, Sione Tuipulotu has made his way to be the number one guy in the 12 jersey this year, taking over from Sam Johnson. Obviously, Sam Johnson spent a bit of time out, so Tuipulotu's got about half the game time. Sam Johnson's there in blue, so between those two guys, there's your main 2 candidates, and I think this number 12 position actually looks relatively healthy. The main guy gets about half, the second guy gets about a third, and then Cameron Redpath there in yellow gets about 10% of the game time. So not an insignificant amount, like a decent wee run. So I think between the 3 of them, that's pretty well covered. Whoever takes the field, I think is going to do a job. And then 13, kind of similar, except the third guy doesn't get much time, and the third guy is Tuipulotu in yellow. But Chris Harris there, he's clearly the main guy. Over half the game time, Mark Bennett is the secondary guy. And I guess Scotland are influenced by the fact that sometimes guys like Chris Harris aren't available because he's playing in the Premiership. So sometimes otherwise he might genuinely have more game time. So just those 3 guys. So the midfield, I think in terms of depth building, looks relatively healthy. Yeah. Outside backs, there's a couple of clear favourites, aren't there? On the wings, more so than any other position in Scottish Rugby in 2022 were both these wingers. Big Duhan on the left wing, more than 80% of the game time. If he's fit and available, he is absolutely playing. Kyle Steyn is there in blue. He's going to be living off scraps basically until Duhan is not available. And then right wing, even more so, Darcy Graham, 90% of the game time. unbelievable. I mean, Rufus McLean is there in blue, and then Damien Hoyland, ever so briefly, another one of these kind of token guys. Feel a little bit for Rufus McLean. I feel like he's a guy who, in terms of his international development, could have used an extra game or two. But Darcy's been in phenomenal form, so it's really hard to deny him, isn't it? And then fullback Stuart Hogg, obviously relinquished the captaincy this year. I don't think he was particularly chuffed about that, but I do think it's probably wiser having a Lucy as your captain than your fullback. But anyway, that is what it is. So Hoggy's there with about 2/3 of the game time. Hutchinson, Ollie Smith, Blair Kinghorn, Kyle Rowe, other performers. But if Hogg's fit, he's going to play, isn't he? It kind of goes without saying. Some of the other backs, I mentioned Scott Steele, Matt Scott, Hugh Jones, James Lang, Sean Maitland, a bunch of guys who could potentially come back in if called upon, who didn't get the nod for whatever reason in 2022. Maitland's not retired, is he? I know he's still playing for Sharsies, hasn't he? I don't think he retired from international rugby, did he? So yeah, what does this make the most selected 15? Well, it's an interesting one in that the Scots are the first side where their current captain does not appear. He's not the number one guy for minutes in any of his positions. Right, so Schoolman, Turner and Ferguson, that's your front row. I think you'd be pretty happy with that. Gilchrist and Johnny Gray, it's a pretty good lock-in duo. Is it the best lock-in duo in the world? Probably not, but it's got its advantages, man. No one tackles like Johnny Gray. Darge, Watson and Ferguson is the back row, so I'm talking about Richie not appearing in terms of the most minutes. There's a lot of tackling in that back row for sure, and I think Ferguson maybe gone under the radar a wee bit. He gets overlooked in terms of performance levels by big loose forwards. Like, everyone talks about the likes of an Artie Savia or Josh Van der Fleer this year, but Matt Ferguson's numbers were phenomenal. Price and Russell 9-10. I think that's very, very good. Tuipulotu and Harris 12-13. Tuipulotu's obviously one of the new faces in that kind of most selected team ahead of Johnson. And then Van der Merwe, Graham and Hogg in terms of a back three. Like very, very attacking oriented, isn't it? Yeah, would put the fear of God into a fair few other teams, wouldn't it, with the amount of tackles these guys bust. But yeah, that's your starting 15. Average age of like 27.5 is about normal. It's older than some of the young squads like France and like Italy, and even a little bit older than the English, who've got a slightly younger squad. It's younger than the likes of the Box and the Irish, but it's in about the middle. So about kind of normal. If I'm not mistaken, they used 53 players though, which is more than any other squad. Even the injury-ravaged Aussies didn't use that many players. I think the Aussies were 52. But like I mentioned, sometimes guys are unavailable. Remember the tour to Argentina, they rested some guys didn't travel, and then some guys were in the Premiership, obviously not available, so they are forced, games played outside the test window, they're forced to kind of use some players they might not ordinarily use. And then a bunch of guys like Alan Dow, Hoyland, Rowe, Velicott, all these guys get like one token game with kind of 10 minutes, so you add their name to the list. But did they add a lot this year? Not really. In the scheme of things, not kind of much impact. Interestingly, despite all these used players, like the starting players average 61% of the game time this year. By which I mean the starting guys, if you have a look at the overall picture, the starting guys like Schoeman, Ferguson, Hamish Watson, Matt Ferguson, Price, Duan and Darcy Graham and Stuart Hogg, all these guys are absolutely dominating their positions. So other teams, which may have used fewer players, still rotated the starting guys out more, if you know what I mean. So, for example, like the English starting guys only got around 53% of the overall minutes. So the Scottish starting guys get more minutes than many of the other teams. Only like Ireland, I think in France, maybe South Africa were kind of similar. Ireland are so far the most in terms of dumping all their minutes into their leading guys. The secondary guys get less game time. So despite the fact that Scotland used so many players, they are still leaning towards the side of the leading guys get most of the game time, if that makes sense. The second guy managed to get an average of 24% of the game time, which is pretty par for the course with most of the teams. So yeah, like I said, it's been an interesting season for Scotland. I do think there's a couple of the games, the Wales one, the All Blacks one, Maybe the Wales one is the most disappointing, but yeah, I still think they've got the players. It's just about getting some kind of consistent performances and winning those big games other than bloody England. You always beat England. I feel like I've been saying this for a couple of years now. But anyway, you guys let us know your thoughts. How do you reckon the Scots may go in 2023? Six Nations not too far away. If you want any rugby gear, check out Level Rugby down in the description. They've got a bunch of good gear. I particularly am fond of the sales section at Level. But anyway, you guys let us know your thoughts. And yes, I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.